It's the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon's turn to unveil her manifesto. It includes a commitment to increase NHS funding by 20% over the course of the next 5 years. Our political editor Glenn Campbell joins me now. Glenn, good morning.
Good morning.
So obviously this is their main pitch for the public vote. The NHS has been the focus for a lot of politics during the pandemic. What do we know about their plans to boost spending?
Well, the plan is to increase spending on frontline NHS services by 20% over the course of the next Parliament, over 5 years. So that means increases year on year, and that by the end of the next Parliament, the service would have access to around £2.5 billion more than it has right now. The SNP say that would effectively deliver an increase more than twice what it would get if the rate of inflation was applied over that time, the projected rate of inflation. So that is a significant uplift. I think Nicola Sturgeon, as party leader, will describe it as transformational. But remember, the NHS has challenges, more acute, following the pandemic, and the SNP has already made clear that if it remains in government, it will be expecting the NHS to deliver more for the cash that it receives as they move to remobilise it after the pandemic and to try and catch up on the backlog that's been created by COVID. So they've been talking about the level of activity in treatment rising by about 10% in the coming year compared to what the NHS would have done before the pandemic, and maintaining that level of activity through the next Parliament. So presumably that will draw on this additional resource. Another point worth making, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has been looking closely at devolved spending and noting that whilst spending in health per head remains higher in Scotland than it does in England, that advantage has been narrowing under successive governments over the course of the devolved period.
To what extent can we expect them to capitalise on the First Minister's handling of the crisis?
Yeah, this seems to be a core message for the SNP in this campaign. They talk about the need for strong leadership, seeing us through the pandemic and into recovery. Of course, all parties are stressing that the next Parliament is about recovery from coronavirus. The SNP are also talking in terms of health in their investment plans of spending an extra £10 billion over the course of a Parliament in renewing NHS facilities, creating fast-track cancer diagnostic centres in every health board in Scotland, and of course in government they've offered a 4% pay rise to nurses and other key health workers. Some unions supportive of that, others remaining neutral. The Royal College of Nursing suggesting that that's not enough and should be rejected. They're also planning to introduce a national care service in the next Parliament, and we should get more detail on that today. It certainly will come with more money for social care and the beginnings of national pay bargaining for those who work in that sector, which should increase wages. And some of the other key policies they've been promoting to reduce poverty, the expansion of free school meals to all primary school children, and an increase in the new child payment, which goes to low-income families with children from £10 a week to £20.
And obviously, Glenn, the Constitution has dominated a lot of the debate time during the campaign. But how can we expect the SNP to sell this in their manifesto without scaring off voters who are less committed to another referendum?
Yeah, there's always a tension in this because if you look at opinion polling, it suggests the country is split down the middle, with around half supportive of the idea of independence, the other half not. So the SNP, in seeking to reach beyond independent supporters, may not always want to put this front and centre. I mean, I'm looking at a leaflet that's come through my door from the SNP, which is promoting the party's election campaign, and when you read through it, there's only a very coded reference to their plans for another independence referendum in the next Parliament. They talk about a vision of a better, fairer, more prosperous future for our country and the means to realise it. The means to realise it, I think, is a reference to IndyRef 2, but it's hardly spelled out clearly. But I think most people know that the SNP stand for independence, and their manifesto most certainly will have a commitment to have IndyRef 2 in the next Parliament, if they can, in the first half of the next Parliament. But Nicola Sturgeon has repeatedly stressed that she wants it after the immediate pandemic crisis is over. What has not been defined is exactly what that means, what conditions would need to prevail for a referendum to go ahead. Of course, the other thing that the SNP would need to go ahead is a majority in the Scottish Parliament, which they hope to have on their own or may have with other independent supporting parties, and the agreement from the UK government, which so far has not been forthcoming, with Boris Johnson very keen to dig in against that.
And we're going to be talking about the idea of universal basic income in just a minute, which seems to have gained traction among a number of the larger parties. Is that likely to turn up today?
Yeah, I think that is another thing to look out for in the SNP manifesto. Nicola Sturgeon has certainly said she would be setting out moves towards that. She's very supportive of the idea. But I think that's where there will be discussion about independence in the SNP's manifesto launch today, because she's also made clear that in order to introduce that policy in the way that she would like, she feels she would require more powers over tax and welfare, the powers that would come with independence. So that may be used as an argument for further constitutional change. Of course, the SNP's critics in this election, those who don't support independence, think that it would be a distraction, a diversion from work to rebuild from the pandemic. The SNP argue that it is essential, albeit it would take some years to achieve, even if the referendum took place on the timetable that they would like.
Glenn, many thanks, and more throughout the day on BBC Radio Scotland.